I'll call to order the Santa Barbara City Council Finance Committee meeting for May 8th. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak on any item that is not on our agenda today? Seeing no one, we will go straight to the staff presentation.
Chair, committee members, good afternoon. Brandon Bodette, Budget Manager. We have, as part of the budget review process, departments bring their fee changes and present them. Today we have the general fund departments. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm actually just going to start with the library and do theirs for them, as there's only one change to theirs. They're adding a replacement fee to their wireless hotspot. We have staff here if you have any questions, but this is the only change for them.
Any questions for Mr. Bodette? Okay. No, thank you very much. I guess I do have a question. I didn't realize you could rent or borrow a hotspot from the library, so that is the case?
That is the case.
That's good to know. Everybody who's listening on watching on television, to go down to the library to get your hotspot. Okay, next item.
Next, we'll bring up police.
Lori Peterson, Business Manager for the Police Department. We have two minor changes basically for the department this year. Oh, this is the old slideshow. Don't look at the two things that we have are the insufficient funds have been added to our various categories like special events, and that was just for a clarity's purpose. Just to make sure that when someone is unable to pay or their check bounces that we have that covered in our fee schedule. And then the other minor change that we made was in the parking citation payment system. The vendor is allowed to charge a processing fee for online payments, and we increased that from $2.50 to $3, which is still significantly less than other online processing fees at this point. And that's in anticipation of contract renewal at the beginning of the fiscal year. And that was it for the police department at this point. We're still working on some larger issues that we're looking at, but we don't have those finalized at this point and looking at special events, et cetera.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions? All right. Thank you very much. Next item. Councilmember Dominguez.
Can you go back to the slide? That's, I'm sorry, that's the wrong presentation. In terms of special events, I understand that overtime or costs like that are a pretty big driver for the police's budget. Is there anything that you've contemplated as a change there to?
It's just going through the analysis process again of looking at our fees set appropriately for the amount of overtime that it costs us and making sure that they're at close to 100% recoverable. Or
Do you know where we are now?
We're probably just a little bit below the range where we should be. We haven't revised our rates for officers and equipment in several years, so that's why we're going through and looking at those again.
So will it come up in this year's budget?
Not in this year's. It'll probably go into next year, and it'll have to come as a special item for review.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have the fire department.
Good afternoon. I'm Ron Lichty, the Fire Business Manager. I'm here to talk about the Fire Department's fees and our proposal to increase them this fiscal year, 19. And to begin with, I wanted to show you our department revenues in total. And you can see that the first column is fiscal year 18, and we have a $3.8 million budget. We're expecting to come in at $6.6 million. All of that is having to do with the extras, having to do with all the mutual aid activity we've had. And then we have a recommended budget of $4.3 million, and we're here to talk about fees and service charges, and we can see that our recommended budget is $201,000, and that represents about a 2% increase over our budget from this current year, and fees in general constitute just about 4% of our total revenue budget. So looking at our fees more in detail, it comprise 5 major categories, and our largest fee is our engine company fire inspections, and we conduct about 4,000 inspections annually. And then we have our various other fees. Building plan check is the amount of time our fire inspectors are at the counter conducting the fire review of plans. Land development team is also fire inspectors' time on large development proposals in that process. T19 inspections is Title 19. That's for state-mandated licensed care facilities. It's a fire inspection, but it's for licensed care facilities. We can't change those fees because they're mandated by the state, and when they change, we're able to change them. And then we issue permits. Overall, we are increasing to keep up with our cost recovery this year. We're increasing across the board our fees just about 3%. And this is a sample of some of our fees, commonly used fees for fire inspections. And for example, the first line talks about engine companies for an apartment and hotel with 3 to 9 units. It takes only 15 minutes. And that fee, for example, we're increasing it to the nearest whole dollar from $28 to $29. And then the same goes for the remainder of those fees. And time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lichty. Any questions? Councilmember Dominguez.
I'm curious, why is it called an engine company fire inspection? You're not inspecting engine companies.
Okay, yes. I think it's called that because it's it's the crew on an engine that go out and conduct the fire inspection.
And do they actually go out in an engine? Or do they take an SUV?
Yes, I think they're taking the engine so they're still in the district to respond to calls.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Lichty.
Next, we'll have Parks and Rec.
Chair Hart and Committee, I'm Mark Sewell. I'm the Parks and Recreation Business Manager. And I have before you a presentation on the fees and charges recommended for fiscal year 19. Thank you, Brandon. So within the Parks and Recreation Department, we have over 600 fees for a multitude of different programs and services that we provide. And the recommended budget for 19 suggests no increases on just over half of those fees. And we're looking to increase 269 fees and delete 27 fees for programs and services that are no longer operated. When we make our fee proposals, we have a number of considerations to take on board. We're looking to try to maximize participation in our programs and services and also make sure that our parks and facilities are used as often as they can be. We obviously want to make sure we're providing a broad range of the community an opportunity to utilize those programs and services. And of course, we look to target specific audiences accordingly. We also don't operate in a vacuum in a number of the areas in which we do provide goods, services and programs. So we have to be considerate to what are other people doing out there in the marketplace, particularly in regards to rentals for parties and events and things like that. It's extremely competitive. There's a lot of private competition out there. And of course, we look at where we have a good reputation for quality to make sure that we can support any fee increases and even the fees that we are charging to make sure that there's good value for money for our constituents. I'm not going to take you through all of the 300 and however many it was changes. I've just pulled a sort of a subsection here. So within the majority of our rental facilities, we're looking at about a 4% increase. We are, like most other departments, seeing increases in our costs, primarily in salary and benefits, and so therefore we need to be aware of that when we're looking at our pricing decisions. We also think that there's ample room in terms of the prices that we do charge in comparison to comparable operators out there. And every year we do a study to see kind of where are we and what are other people doing in terms of how much does it cost to rent this building or that park or this building. Within our summer camp programming, there's a range of increases that we are looking to make. And when you, of course, look at percentages, sometimes it can be a little high, but it could be representing a small dollar amount. But again, we're looking to recover, in some cases, some increases in costs we're seeing due to minimum wage or to MOU changes. A significant portion of our summer program is supported and provided with hourly labour. And so, of course, a lot of those people will be first affected by any minimum wage increases that have been coming through. For our non-profit leases in our some of our buildings, we are recommending a 3% increase to keep in line with general cost inflation. They are still very, very good value leases for our partners in those areas. Picnic sites, again, consistency there with the picnic sites with regards to our buildings. And I'll mention on the lifeguard service fees, lifeguards have some increased certification requirements that are coming through from the state, and these are for some of our group activities where we offer things for like night moves and those kind of multi-person events that take place. And we're recognising that the costs to provide services have been increasing and are likely to continue to increase over the next few years as minimum wage creeps up to $15. And so what we bring in before you here is the approval to increase those fees by up to 16 and 20%, while we're still working out where do we actually need to land those fees so that we're still providing the services but aren't necessarily looking to try to gouge people too quickly or give them a very large increase in one go. So there's still a bit of work that we're doing to try to define and iron out exactly where we think that needs to be with all the changes that have happened and are likely to happen. This fee that we're bringing to you wouldn't apply until after this summer anyway, so it wouldn't impact anyone's programming right now. We just want to sort of bring it forward and just let you know that that's an area where we think that we do need to see a slightly larger than 3-4% increase to maintain cost recovery. And then to just mention to you, we're really excited about the fact that we now have a new facility available for the public, the old site of the old carousel, which was removed back in December, and the Carousel House, which took a long time to come up with as a name. We held an event a few weeks ago, which a couple of council members were able to attend. And we're really excited by this as an opportunity. We think this can be used for recreational programming and also for private events, public events, all that of that nature, right adjacent to a wonderful parkway. And we've priced that very competitively because, again, we want to see that building being used throughout the week and at the weekends. There's actually an item before the full council later today to hopefully approve our fee schedule. And again, it's been priced competitively to make sure that we can encourage as much use of that building as possible.
Any questions for Mr. Sewell? Councilmember Dominguez.
Are we going to change the name of the Carousel House now that there's no longer a carousel?
Chair Hart, Councilmember Dominguez. I think Carousel House is the working name. I think most people would know where it is, which is obviously one of the good things you want to think about when you're branding a building. I'm sure we'd be open to any new ideas that might come forward. But at this time, we are marketing it as the Carousel House. It's the former Carousel.
And the lifeguard service fees that you mentioned, and you mentioned night moves. So do we require them to pay for our lifeguards kind of directly, or is that just a service that's optional for ocean and pool events?
So the activities that take place along the beach that are permitted do require us to provide lifeguard services to make sure that the safety of all the participants is in place. And so within the permitting process for people to say, hey, we'd like to operate this activity or that activity, that's a conversation that takes place with the supervisors for the beach and for the public events, and then we look to recover those costs associated to make sure that we've got enough cover there to make sure everyone can participate safely.
And is that a regulation, a state or federal regulation that requires us to do it, or are we doing it kind of as a backstop?
I'm unfortunately not qualified to give you the definitive answer to that. I mean, I think it's the right thing to do. I would be guessing, so I can get back to you in terms of what specific requirement, whether it be federal, state, or whether it's just a risk assessment that we've taken as a city. I'd be happy to follow that up and send you an email.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Sewell? Well, thank you for your presentation.
Next, we'll hear from Community Development.
Thank you. Ms. Brooke or Mr. Stuffler, who's going first?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Renee Brooks, City Planner. I'll begin the presentation, and then at some point I'll be handing it off to Chief Building Official Andrew Stuffler. The Community Development Department's fee resolution was part of the budget package submitted to Council in April of this year. I will be going over those recommended fee changes that were part of that budget submittal. We also have some additional changes that we are proposing since then, and I'll spend a little more time on those for your discussion today. And those additional changes were just distributed to you in our 2 fee resolutions there and are represented by additional cross-out and underline. First, I want to let you know that we have recently released a request for proposals to seek a consultant to do a land development team fee study. And this is something that we've been wanting to do for many years. The last time we did a comprehensive fee study for land development services was in 2004. And since then, we've taken a very conservative approach to increasing our fees related to land development. With the information that we hope to receive from this fee study at the end of this calendar year, we can use that information for next year's fee resolution. And so our approach this year for the fee resolution is similar to one that we've taken in many years past, which is a pretty conservative approach to increasing fees by 2 to 3% to adjust for the cost of living and salary increases. We also attempt to certainly not increase the amount of general fund subsidy to planning division services. Based on some additional fee increases last year, we estimate that at this point we're at about a 40% cost recovery for those programs in planning that charge a fee for services, so that excludes long-range planning. Building and Safety always seeks 100% cost recovery in their services. In terms of the fee resolution that was submitted as part of our budget to City Council, that represented a general 3% increase in most fees. And as I mentioned, that was to increase our cost recovery for our services and further reduce the general fund subsidy for the planning division services. There were a couple deviations from that 3% increase in that fee resolution that was submitted to you. We did propose some higher increases to certain appeals that would go to the Planning Commission, and that was really to make those fees more equitable. We had a couple that were set at $250 and some that were set at $505, and so we made them all go up the same amount this year to $545. We also increased design review fees by ranging from about 10 to 30% increase in design review fees. And that is to reflect an additional service that we intend to provide and have already begun providing to applicants to do a very thorough review of plans before projects go to the design review boards for project design approval. We had some instances where we had not done that thorough review and projects would get into building permit plan check and we would catch errors that we did not catch prior. And so with that additional service, we intend to increase those fees by a pretty significant amount. Also, we found that it takes a lot more time than we initially thought to process Mills Act contracts, and those the contracts for those historic properties who wish to renovate their properties, and therefore they get a property tax break. We're proposing to increase those from $480 to $525. And then the modification pre-application fee and the planner consultation are two services we provide early on in a project review before an application is actually submitted. And we are proposing to raise those fees to better reflect the actual time that we spend with applicants in that part of the process. We also needed to add some fees to our fee resolution to reflect either changed procedure or new applications that were introduced as part of the new zoning ordinance. So we, several months ago, formalized a process to do zoning information reports without going on the site if we were not authorized specifically to do the site inspection. So we have a reduced fee for ZIRs if we do not do a full on-site inspection. And then we have some new applications like minor zoning exceptions, some new types of performance standard permits, and some temporary uses, including mobile food vendors. We needed to add fees to our fee resolution for those. And then we've eliminated some fees, or revised some fees, including eliminating 2 tiers of the supplemental design review fee, clarifying some wording in the environmental assessment section, clarifying and also adding a fee for recorded agreements. That specifically is a fee that we are using or would be using a lot going forward with the accessory dwelling unit covenants. And then separating fee for very specific type of vegetation removal, agricultural use fee. And then I'll hand it off now to Andrew Stuffler.
Thank you. So building and safety, our fees, as Renee had mentioned, we try to recover 100% of our direct expenses with our fees. So our increases initially were 2%, and we were encouraged to increase them to 3%, and we'll talk about that at the close of the PowerPoint here. So you'll see a 3% increase for most fees. There are some that we choose to not increase every year to try to assist the community in making, environmentally responsible decisions. So we try to minimize the cost of the electric charging stations, the photovoltaic systems. We want to support the use of our parks for festivals. So the generator setup inspection that we do, we try not to increase that, and the festival wiring. So that if you've been through this a couple times, excuse me, you'll see these fees always kind of stay where they're at. We try not to increase them. We're adding two new fees. One is in response to some direction that we've recently received for requiring signage, neighborhood signage of accessory dwelling units. Since those permits are processed through my counter as opposed to the planning counter, we need to put that similar fee into our fee schedule so that we can charge for that sign that's going to go up to help the neighborhood understand what development might be going on in their neighborhood relative to ADUs. The stormwater pollution prevention system fee we're specifically putting in the fee schedule. We had another fee in here that was hourly, but our customers couldn't anticipate what that hourly cost would be. They didn't know the hour factor. So we thought it would be best to put in an inspection fee that does kind of cap it at a certain amount, 4 hours of inspection time minimum. This is in response to our stormwater pollution prevention program and the permit that's issued to us from the Regional Water Quality Board. So we do these inspections on behalf of the Creeks Division of Parks and Recreation. We have one minor modification. We changed the stucco work fee to per 1,000 square feet to try to provide some relativity so that people who are doing a small patch or maybe 100 square feet or 200 square feet of stucco work after they put in new windows or something are only paying $68 for their permit as opposed to the same amount that someone might pay to restucco their entire home of 4,000 or 5,000 square feet. So we tried to add some proportional basis to that, keep the fee low. And I think with that, back to Renee.
So that portion of the presentation really concludes the fees that were submitted to you in our fee resolution as part of the budget submittal. What I'll be covering now are some additional requests that were not included in the original budget submittal. And this is in response to really several discussions that we've had with City Council in the recent past about services and the expectations and meeting the community's needs in terms of providing timely plan review. So we are proposing for your consideration and discussion today some additional fee increases in both planning and building. In the planning division, we're proposing an additional 5% fee increase to the 3% that was proposed originally for generally an 8% across the board fee increase. There are also some other specific fees that deviate from that 8% that I'll cover in a moment. But what that 5% additional fee increase would generate is approximately $114,000. And then we would also propose an additional 1% fee increase in building and safety to generate an additional $62,000. And with that, we would propose bringing on an additional 1.5 full-time equivalent of an associate planner for specifically plan check purposes. And that could be funded by these additional fee increases and our estimated revenue. This is both, this additional money would be generated not only by fee increases, but the additional workload that we're seeing in plan review, that we believe we could support an additional 1.5 planner to help keep up with the workload. In addition, we've proposed some other revisions to the planning fee resolution, which I've distributed to you today, that further clarify some existing fees, some additional revisions due to the new zoning ordinance. Again, it's mostly clarification and reorganization within the fee resolution to make it match the terminology that's in the zoning ordinance. We've also proposed to eliminate the 2 tiers of an optional pre-application review that had been in the fee resolution for many years and really doesn't, the amount of work for the pre-application review, team review that's done by the land development team doesn't warrant 2 tiers. We've proposed to eliminate the lower tier and just retain the higher fee, which would be $2,765. Also, as I mentioned, we are clarifying and increasing the fee for staff to prepare recorded agreements. We also need to add a fee for the release of prior recorded agreements, as we are now being charged to perform that task by the county clerk. And so the fee there is in accordance with California Government Code Section 27361.3. It's not a specific dollar amount. It just reflects whatever it is each year that the county clerk needs to pass on to us. We would want to pass that along to the applicant that is, or the application that's triggering the release of a prior recorded agreement. And that concludes our presentation for community development.
Any questions for Ms. Brooke or Mr. Stuffler? Councilmember Dominguez?
Thank you. What is the timeline for the fee study?
Committee Member Dominguez, the timeline is up here. We released the RFP on April 19th. The deadline to receive proposals is May 31st. With that, we hope to evaluate and choose our consultant, bring that to City Council in July. And based on the expectations we've laid out in the RFP, we expect a consultant to submit their final findings in November.
Okay. So if all goes according to plan, next year at this time, we should be looking at some revised
That's our
numbers.
hope, yes.
And with the RFP, I know on this PowerPoint, you list a few of the considerations: increased cost recovery, further reduced general fund subsidy. I noticed one of the previous presenters had a list of considerations, and I'm wondering, as part of the process with the consultant, will they kind of fill out that list? Will there be more considerations?
Committee Member Dominguez, we do have that wrapped into the RFP in terms of what we expect them to provide in terms of service. Would be recommendations for not only looking at neighboring communities and what they charge for land development team services, but also what else should be taken into account, like our longstanding City Council policy to subsidize planning services. Should that continue? What are other communities doing? So that is part of what we ask the consultant to provide to us.
Councilmember Dominguez, also in the RFP is a requirement that the consultant reach out to stakeholder groups. I believe we left that in the RFP so that we can assure that the public understands, our users understand what we're going through in developing the fees. And
I was thinking about it in terms of something like the Mills Act contract fee. Are there some things that we want to keep the price less than full recovery because it provides an extra community benefit? And that's something that I'm not sure if the consultant necessarily needs to do or wants to do, or if that's more staff, or if you want council or planning commission's input.
Thank you. That's a good point, Councilmember Dominguez, and one where I think if the consultant came back with a certain recommendation of here's a full cost recovery fee to perform this service, then we would take that and consider that, and in our recommendation to council would weigh the pros and cons for exactly the reasons you mentioned and reasons that Mr. Stuffler mentioned, why we do purposefully keep some fees low to encourage people to get permits for some of the work that otherwise they might not if the fee was 100% full cost recovery.
So, and to use the Mills Act, I was kind of curious, do we get a number of applications for those contracts every year, or is that something that's seldom used, or are those customers or constituents price sensitive?
I'm not sure that they're price sensitive. We've kept the fee fairly low. We do have a goal, I believe right now, because it's set up as a it's not a trial program, but we, at the outset, our goal was to bring forward 8 applications for a Mills Act contracts, and we've not had a problem receiving 8 that are interested so far. So we've been able to carry forward at least 8 each year.
Okay, no one's complained about the price?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. And in terms of the increased staffing and the increased design review fees, what type of oversight are you guys planning to make sure that that actually increases the speed of service? And I could see it increasing the quality and maybe not the speed, or hopefully both. But is there anything you can do to show the community that, hey, this really, we're tracking this and it really is effective?
That's a great question, too, and I think it'd be more qualitative. I do believe it will increase the quality of projects, their likelihood of getting through building permit plan check more quickly. Applicants may see a slight delay in getting on design review boards for project design approval, because we do want to make sure that before we do that, it's really ready and that project could be quickly turned around and submitted for building permit application. So it in many cases, the overall timeline may be the same, but we would catch those major issues earlier in the process before more time and money has been invested in a project.
Great. I think that's a very worthwhile goal. In terms of the what's the term I'm looking for? The pre-project review, or the
pre-application review?
Pre-application review. I think we were talking about it in terms of the Accelerate, and I think was it Mr. Hart? You were asking what the numbers were, and I think it was pretty minimal.
I think that's
and I'm wondering if increasing the fee will have an even further detrimental effect on that number, or if there's another way we can incentivize those users to go that path.
That's a good question, Councilmember Dominguez. It's my impression and opinion that the decision to participate in a pre-application review relative to the Accelerate program is not based on the dollars. What I heard during the testimony of the stakeholders in the private sector during the Accelerate update was we would gladly pay for services if it would help us in the long run to shorten up our time frame and get our businesses going. The predicament or paradox is no one wants to pay the extra money until they're in trouble in plan check, and then that time's already passed. So we're trying to help people understand that this is a benefit to them through outreach, but really the professional community has to acknowledge the benefit and then take advantage of it, and we're struggling to get them to do that. They prefer to submit something to us to get into the plan check process because that starts the process for them, and they think that starts the clock, so they'll be done sooner. Whereas maybe taking a couple weeks to have a preliminary review of something and iron out some kind of core problems might save them 4 to 6 weeks at the end. But it's difficult to see that when your client's pushing you to get plans submitted so they can get in the tenant space.
I could see where there's kind of a hurry up and wait dance, particularly if it's a complicated project with several vendors involved or several parties and a bank. So if you see any solutions, that we can advocate for, please let me know. That's all the questions I have. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Friedman?
A question regarding the 8% potential fee increase for the associate planner and for plan check. Is this in any way related? When we had our planning commission and joint council discussion about future work efforts, and there was a hybrid funding model approach, so we could fund some of these long-range planning projects that had been delayed. Would this in any way address that, or would it free up other resources so that we could get to some of those longer-term projects? Because I know if I recall, there was about a 1.5 position increase, part of that hybrid. So is this that component of it, or is this something else?
Committee member Friedman, it's a separate position request that we're talking about here. What we discussed at the joint meeting was, it can be confusing because it was also 1.5 FTE at the project planner level to help move forward some of those longer range major work efforts. This request would be specifically for plan check, and it would be new staff brought on board. So when we looked back over the years at how many overtime hours or how many comp hours were accrued by staff in order to just try to maintain a baseline in zoning plan review, it equated to about a half of a planner that we were just paying people extra money to come in and work on Flex Fridays in the weekend to try to keep up with plan check. And even then, we're not meeting our expectations. With the additional workload we've seen with accessory dwelling unit applications, we believe we need 1.5 associate planners to meet our timelines, to meet our P3 objectives. So this is specifically just for current planning and building permit plan check. The 1.5 FTE for project planner to move forward some of those major work efforts. We're still looking at different funding sources that we may have for that. We believe there may be a potential with some of the successor agency money related to affordable housing that we might be able to bring someone on board if they work on certain work efforts that are related to affordable housing to either incentivize or encourage or somehow generate affordable housing. But we're looking at, we need to look at some other options to try to fully fund that 1.5 FTE that we discussed in early April.
And the only question I had is when the consultant is looking at the fee study, will they be able to have some examples of typical developments and what the bundle of fees would represent and at the different price points? Because I think it's easy to get lost on the cumulative impact of all of these separate, disparate fees on a homeowner who's doing a simple remodeling job. I think there's a lot of sympathy here and on the council for those folks, maybe less so for folks who are doing development. Other council members have different views about that. But I think it's really important for us to understand how these individual pieces add up to a net dollar amount and the impact on that on somebody trying to do something simple in their home. So is that part of what they're going to be looking at?
Mr. Chair, I do believe so. Part of what we've asked in the RFP is for the methodology that a professional consultant would propose in order to carry out the fee study. But we do expect, in order to meet our shortened time frame, that we would need to provide for them some examples of classic permit application types that we see fairly often, like a coastal development permit with a modification. What does that typically take us, and what are the fees for that? And so we'll have to help them along, since we won't be tracking our time on a daily basis for a year or more. We'll need to provide them with our best educated estimate of how long certain applications take across the scale of all types of development, yes.
Well, that work product is really important for this conversation, so thank you for planning ahead and making that happen. Any other questions for staff? Is there a motion? Do we need a motion? Is this direction, or do we have a roundup at the end? Oh, there's one more. Okay, excuse me. Sorry about that.
Sorry about that. Lastly, we have Public Works.
Okay. We don't have a
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Finance Committee. I'm Adam Hendel, Principal Engineer in Public Works, and I'm here to talk to you about land development fees in the Public Works Department, primarily Engineering Division, which is the division I'm in, and also Transportation Planning. So just to kind of reiterate what Ms. Brooke and Mr. Stuffler said about across-the-board increases, we're proposing a 3% increase across the board to cover expense increases. Public Works general fund fees for supporting land development is currently near full cost recovery today, so we don't have a high general fund subsidy. And to piggyback on the fee study discussion, I think we'll be looking at potentially higher fee changes or modifying our fee structure during the next budget cycle after we have the results of the fee study with potential changes in the service levels that we provide in terms of plan check, inspection services for public works permits. And that's all I had.
Any questions for Mr. Hendel? Thank you. Appreciate
you.
that. Mr. Burdette, do you need a motion?
We don't need a motion today.
Okay. We'll get that at the end. We do. Never mind. Would anybody like to make a motion?
I would move that we recommend these proposed changes to the council and ask the
second.
staff bring it to council.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed and abstained. Matter carries unanimously, and we are adjourned. Thank you, Mr. Burdette.